Hello everyone, and welcome to another wet day here in Belize. Today's job is another organization and infrastructure build. Specifically, I'm working with PVC. We use this stuff a lot around here, not only for actual plumbing, which there's a lot of between all our different research buildings, but also in general just for making various research stuff. It's a really useful material for making research equipment. The problem is that what we end up with is multiple bins like this, where we have tons of different leftover couplings of various sizes, various types, and we end up inevitably with multiple of these boxes scattered around the property, and it makes it absolutely impossible to find what you need when you need it. And even though we've got pretty much every fitting you could ever want, I can never find the one that I'm after when I'm after it. And I'm really sick and tired of wasting my time running around between 4 different buildings trying to find the piece of PVC that I need. So today's job is to try to build an organizational system so that we have a single location that we can put all of our different bits and bobs, and I can easily find what I need and know exactly what we do and do not have in stock at the station. Before I get to actually building this, I want to quickly show you what I mean when I say that there's lots of things we build for research out of PVC. And so in this little clip, the first thing you'll notice is that lovely frame and tarp up over the boat. That is constructed out of PVC because Belize is a very wet, rainy country, and that framework and tarp allows us to continue to conduct research out on the water without all our expensive equipment getting drowned. The next thing you notice is that PVC frame, which as you can now see is completely full of turtles. This is what we call our Hickory prison or Hickory jail. Those turtles are known locally as Hickory. Officially, they are the Central American river turtle, but we all like to call them Hickory. And they are one of our main focal species. They're critically endangered, and so we're doing a lot of work to understand them and conserve them. But they are a strictly aquatic turtle. They really do not like to come out of the water, and they do very poorly when they're out of the water. So when we have a situation like at this study site where we're able to catch a lot of them in a short period of time, we really don't like to keep them out of the water while we're working on them, and so we temporarily put them in this Hickory jail for an hour or two while we process them, and then they can go back into the river. And so this lets us keep the turtles in the water and keep them nice and happy while we're working with them, but it's just built out of PVC with some mesh attached to it. And we're constantly building this sort of thing for our research, or any weird random thing you can think of. We've probably built it out of PVC at some point. And so that brings us back to trying to actually build a system for organizing all of this. For this project, I was trying to do things as cheaply as possible, and so the only lumber I actually bought was this really rough cut pine that I'm going to use for the vertical supports. And I don't have a planer or a jointer, but still I wanted to at least rip the edges off because they were really nasty. And so here I'm just using the table saw to rip off those edges and make the wood a little bit nicer to work with. This is, by the way, a new table saw, and I don't have the dust extraction system quite set up right yet, which is why there's just sawdust going everywhere in this clip. So for this, I wanted to try to use a dado joint, which is what you're seeing here. This was just a dummy piece that I was practicing with. Basically, a dado is just a rectangular groove that you put into a piece of wood and then slot another piece into it. I've never tried making one before, but I thought it'd be fun to try one for this. This is also supposed to be a really strong joint for the type of shelf I'm building, and it should save me having to do a whole lot of pocket screws, which I don't really like to do. To make these dados, I'm just going to use the router table slot that came on our table saw. And basically I'm going to do all the boards at a given groove position, and then slide the fence over and do the next groove, and so on and so forth until I've got all the boards done. And doing it one groove at a time like that should let me keep the grooves really perfectly aligned with each other so that my shelves are reasonably straight. Now the wood I'm going to use for the shelves is actually 3/4 of an inch thick, and the biggest router bit I had for a rectangle slot like this was only 1/2 an inch. So after each groove, I need to move the fence over 1/4 of an inch and then make another groove just to expand that original one so it's 3/4, not 1/2 inch. So for the actual shelves and for a lot of the wood for this project, I'm trying to reuse some old wood that we had around. This is actually siding material from an old building that we've been tearing down. And for this, I actually specifically selected boards that were cracked or had holes like you see there, or some of the defect that meant we couldn't use them for much else. But none of that really matters for what I need it for this project. And so this will let me reuse as much wood as possible, because all this wood is wood that basically would have been scrap otherwise. And we really like to, reduce our impact of all of these projects by reusing these whenever possible. The only issue is that there's still nails in them for when they were attached to the side of the building. So I've got to remove all of those, and the nails will go into our scrap metal bucket, and they'll get recycled just like everything else. So now I need to cut those boards into 6-inch little pieces to make the little shelves that are going to slide into those dado joints. And you'll notice, again, the wood is really cracked, it's broken, there's lots of holes, you're going to see it split in half a couple of times. As you'll see as this goes, none of that really matters for what I need. It's all usable for my purposes for this project. Okay, so now comes the fun part where I try to put the boards into the joints to make the dado joints. And originally I started using wood glue, and I know you're supposed to put glue on both sides when you're putting two pieces of wood together. I didn't do that because I'm lazy, and ultimately the wood glue ended up just not being the way that this was going to go, so it doesn't really matter anyway. Like I said earlier, I've never actually tried making dado joints before, and I had some pretty naive notions about how this was going to go, and they didn't work out. So you're going to see a fair amount of me failing here for a bit until I finally figure out how to actually do this. Because originally I thought that I could just kind of line all the dados up for one row and then move on to the next row, and so on and so forth. But those of you with actual woodworking experience know that that doesn't actually work. And so it's not going to work for me either, and I'm going to have to change strategies here in a bit. But, here's a couple minutes of me failing at doing this correctly, and then I'll show you a way that actually worked. And so part of the issue that I'm actually having here is those old cracked boards that I said were going to be fine. The cracks don't bother me, but the problem is that a lot of the boards are cupped, and I didn't really realize that. That means that if you look at them at a cross section, the two edges fold up and it makes almost a U, and the cups don't want to slide in there. Also, I cut my bottom board a little too short there, and like any shoddy woodworker, I had to lengthen it. But now, at this point, I finally figured out a solution that works, which is to actually hold the top in place with that pipe clamp and hold the bottom in place by screwing the board in, and then that lets me really have a snug fit that I can drive those little shelves in, and those dado slots really hold it. But you can see what I did earlier at the top is just completely worthless and has to be redone as I go. But having that pressure at the top and at the bottom, that works pretty well and let me really get those in there. It's still not beautiful woodworking. The boards kind of bow a little bit at the edges, and I didn't take time to clean up the joints or do anything fancy. This is a pretty quick and dirty build, but it'll work just fine for what I need, and it lets me reuse all this old wood and cost almost nothing to build, so that's all fine by me. You can see there a couple of the boards split in half, but again, once they're hammered into those slots, it doesn't really matter. So once all of those slots were in, I needed to make basically little front pieces for each shelf so that my PVC isn't falling out. And so again, I'm using the old siding for that, and I'm just taking the boards and ripping them into smaller pieces that'll cover each shelf. And again, I'm using the old siding, so it's going to be a bit rough. It's not going to be perfectly even, but this isn't a visual build. This is a practical build. So you can see each of the little pieces to cover the front of a given shelf. And my strategy for this, rather than getting the sizes just right to begin with, is I'm basically just going to screw them all in as is, and then I'll just take a circular saw and go down each side and trim off the excess wood. So for the most part, the goal here is that I'm going to have a row for each size of PVC and a column for each common type of fitting. But I wanted some extra compartments down at the bottom for things like conduit piping and pieces that are specific for installing things like toilets and sinks. That way I can keep that stuff a little separate from everything else. And so I'm adding in those bottom pockets now to accommodate those types of pieces. So for the back of this, I found this great old mesh material that we just had lying around. It's almost a perfect fit for what I needed. I did not cut this beforehand off screen. This is just actually the size that it was. And so again, we get to reuse some old stuff that we had lying around the station and give it a second chance at life. And it'll save us money and help reduce the impact of our projects. And those are both great goals in my mind. And there we are. Now I just need to shuffle it in place, but that's more or less it. I'm going to add some labels to it so that I know what size and type is meant to go in each little box. But that's a PVC sorter. It should do the job. You'll have to forgive my paint work here. My handwriting and painting is even worse than my carpentry. So now's the really fun part. I went around the entire station and gathered up all the little bits and bobs of PVC that I could find. I ended up with this mountain of boxes, and now I get to organize it all and fill this shelf out. And this will not only let us see what we have right now, but it'll also let us see what we're missing, which means we can stock those pieces, and that should save us a lot of time and money in the long run, because we're constantly having things like a pipe breaking, and then we have to stop everything and drive 20 minutes down the road to the hardware store to get the fitting that we need to fix the broken pipe, and then drive all the way back. And now we can just stock a little bit of everything. That way, when we have an emergency like that, we have the piece on hand, we know exactly where it is, and we don't have to waste gas and time going to get the part. And there she is. I don't really know what to say about this. It's not pretty. It's a pretty ugly build, both because of the scrap material I was using and because I just really don't know what I'm doing with carpentry. But it should work just fine. It will let us organize everything that we have, and that's really all it needs to do. So overall, I'm pretty happy with it. I'm glad I was able to reuse all this material, and this should do the job for us. Thank you all very much for watching this. If you liked it, please subscribe. And also to see more about the research we're doing and more about the Hecate, please follow us on social media at SSF Belize. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.